Good evening. So we know that in the New Testament or the Gospels, that in Christianity, salvation has to do with the saving of one's soul. Saving of one's soul. But when we look at the Old Testament or the writings of the Old Testament and the prophets of the Old Testament and books like Proverbs, um, well, let's just start with the Old Testament. Genesis. It's not about saving your soul in Genesis. And so this idea about salvation was not originally about saving your soul. And so we know this because when we look at the story of Noah and the flood, it's not his soul that was saved, it was his skin. It was his life that was saved from destruction by a flood. His life was saved and the life of his family was saved. And his nearest relatives were saved because they got on the boat with him, right? That's the story. And the reason why that is because the idea was that the God of Israel saves you from destruction by following his ways, which are the ways of righteousness. So the idea of Genesis with the story of the flood is not that Noah's life was, that his soul was saved, but that his life was saved from an early death. And so this is one of the differences between the old teaching and what we have in the New Testament. So there was a guy I was talking to on a group. We were discussing religion, and he goes on to talk about how in Matthew 19, Jesus says that you have to continue to follow the commandments. He says, but if you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. That's Matthew 19:17. If you want to enter into life, keep the commandments. In other words, keep following the commandments of Moses, right? And so the commandments of Moses in particular don't apply to salvation of one's soul either. They apply to the salvation of the people of Israel who those commandments were written for. Because at the time of Moses, they had formed a group which was, they formed themselves into a religious order, and then that religious order formed into a nation, like an alliance between, tribes in Canaan. And then they formed into the kingdom of Israel according to the story, right? So what we have is the salvation, and then we have the prophet, let's say like Isaiah, who's constantly prophesying about the coming destruction of the people of Israel if they do not turn back to the path of righteousness and the laws that had been put forth by Moses, right? So the theme here is not a theme of saving your soul, but saving your life, saving your children's lives, saving your nation from destruction, saving your tribe from destruction. And this is why people often ask, if Abraham wasn't a Christian, how could he have, if he didn't profess to be a Christian, how could he have not gone to hell, right? You have people that say this. Well, what all the people that lived before Jesus, did they all go to hell? Well, that's an interesting question, and people often don't answer that question properly, but the shorter answer is that the word hell means the grave. And so the idea comes from, hell is a Greek word for Sheol, which means the grave in Hebrew. And so these people did end up going to the grave if they were actual people that lived and not just fictional characters, that is. Anyone who lived then, before the time of Jesus, and that wasn't a Christian, you could say, well, they did go to the grave. They all died, right? But that wasn't what the Old Testament was about. The Old Testament wasn't about saving your soul from destruction. It was about saving your life from an early death, saving your family from death, saving your tribe from death, saving the people of Israel from destruction by the Assyrians and the Persians and the Amalekites and the Neo-Babylonians and everyone else who had waged war against them, the Philistines, right? All the different people that they were at war with as a tribal group. Well, the idea was if they followed the God of Israel, Hezekiah put this forth in Jerusalem. If you follow the God of Israel, we'll be victorious, right? We'll be victorious as a military order. We'll be victorious as a kingdom here in the kingdom of Judah. So that was the idea. It was not a philosophy of the afterlife. It was not a philosophy of the afterlife at all. It was a philosophy of how do you navigate this life, and the way to navigate this life is to follow these commandments and be on the path of righteousness and virtue. So there's really two philosophies there. One is the code of Moses, and then there's all these other codes in the Bible, and then there's books like the Book of Proverbs, which is a little more descriptive on what the path of righteousness is, more so than, let's say, all the different law codes of Exodus and Leviticus and Deuteronomy, which is really, Deuteronomy is just mainly about just war and killing people. It's like a war code. And so those codes are different than, let's say, Proverbs, which is a code of morality, of how to actually stay away from evil and make sure that you're on the path of goodness and righteousness and doing what is right and avoiding what is wrong and staying away from the wicked people. And you know what I mean? There's a key story there, but the idea is this will give you a long life, right? It's not about your salvation in the afterlife. Now, I believe that when the body dies, that the soul continues to live on afterwards. But this is not what the Bible is talking about in the Old Testament. It is not what it is talking about in the Old Testament. Why does it turn towards that in the New Testament? Likely because of the writings of Philo Judaeus, who sought to harmonize the teachings of the Old Testament with Greek philosophy. Because the Greek philosophers, since around 500 BC, were trying to understand the nature of the universe and the nature of the human soul and its relationship to the universe. And so this was a totally different philosophy about one's soul and the survival of oneself as a soul after the death of the body, which is not the teachings of the Old Testament. It has nothing to do with the Old Testament, really. The Old Testament has to do with follow God or be destroyed. Follow God or you will die. Follow God or you'll be killed. If you don't follow the commandments, the Assyrians will invade us and kill us all. If you don't stay on the path of righteousness, you will die in a flood. If you don't stay away from deviancy and degeneracy and evil, fire and brimstone will rain down from heaven and kill everybody like it did in Sodom and Gomorrah. So these are the stories. They're stories about the salvation of you and your immediate life. So this was kind of allegorical in terms, is what Philo Judaeus said was an allegory for a spiritual salvation. And so this is what we see in the story of the Gospels is all of this idea about the salvation of one's life is now being rewritten as a salvation of one's soul. And so I think that this could have it could have organically evolved into that, or it obviously had also a lot of influence from Greek philosophy, from the Pythagorean line, which started around, I would say, around 600 BC, between 600 and 500 BC, and was heavily influenced also by the Egyptian philosophy of the afterlife. But so that's another story. So when people ask, for instance, this question, which is asked, it's been asked over and over again for must be 1,000 years or more, is what about the people that came before Jesus? Are they all in hell? How do we get them into heaven? Well, the answer is the religion changed. And so at the time, there was no, hell is the grave. So that's the other thing, is people have a misunderstanding of what the word hell means. It means the grave. And so, this is all rewritten in Christianity or in the four Gospels in a new allegory about the human soul. And allegorically it does work, because if you commit evil acts, then your soul kind of dies. You go into a miserable state. And you see miserable people that are just totally unhappy, and their soul is destroyed. Because when the soul is alive, it's happy and it's well, and it's very thrilled with existence. And so this idea of the transgressions against life result in misery, which is another type of quote-unquote hell. So it's actually in Christianity a state of mind. A state of mind of hell, or a state of mind of being in paradise by living with the truth and following the light and being the light of life, right? So that's the philosophy of the difference between salvation in the Old Testament, in the stories of Genesis, in the stories of Sodom and Gomorrah, in the stories of the flood, in the stories of the wars of the Israelites, and the story of the Exodus. It's always the salvation of the people in their immediate life. Now, did the Israelites believe in reincarnation? Yes, they did. They did, and we know that they did because in the New Testament, for instance, you have, and I don't have the passages in front of me, but you will find that Jesus Christ says that, and you can look this up yourself, just use the keywords, is that John the Baptist is Elijah. He says that he is Elijah. And this is because the prophecy of Elijah was that he was going to return. And so Jesus Christ says that John the Baptist was in fact Elijah. Now, John the Baptist denies being Elijah in one of the stories, but Jesus Christ says he is in fact Elijah. Now, some people take that and say, well, Elijah never died. He went up in a cloud, right? He just was taken up by God in a cloud, and he didn't really die. Well, we have the birth story of Elijah, and we know that his mother gave birth to him, so he must have died and was reincarnated. So that's what reincarnation is. So we have a story of reincarnation in the story of John the Baptist. We also have the followers of Christ alluding to reincarnation by suggesting that he is one of the old prophets. That Jesus Christ could be Jeremiah or one of the old prophets or Isaiah, or however I think they list out some of the old prophets, including Jeremiah. Who do people say I am? He says. Oh, some people say you're one of the old prophets. Well, these are the prophets they list in that passage are prophets that have been dead for a long time, hundreds of years. And so that's another allusion to reincarnation. So the salvation of one's soul would have to do with not going someplace that's nice, like the Ritz-Carlton in the sky, but to go to be in a state of happiness, a state of mind of happiness, rather than a state of mind of misery. So it's really has to do with your state of mind, which is really a Greek concept of heaven and hell. Would be the state of mind of that allegory of the grave, but for a soul, right? Or the allegory of being in the heavens, but for a soul. In other words, you're high as a kite naturally, not with drugs. Don't do drugs. Drugs are dangerous, and they cause mental illness. So stay away from that. I'm not someone that promotes that at all. But I'm just saying, the natural high of being on the path of righteousness. That's actually how you really want to get high, is to be on the path of truth, righteousness, doing what is right, being responsible. You'll feel really good about yourself. So that's the way to get that, not to ingest toxic chemicals that poison you. So anyway, this is the difference between the Old Testament and New Testament ideas about salvation. And that is going to wrap up this video. Have a good night.